I'm really pleased to welcome you all to this SPIN Chennai's big video conference session with Jeff Sutherland, the international guru and the top gun from USA. Jeff was indeed a fighter pilot in the US Air Force in his early days, and he has achieved a top gun status way back in 1967. And he has flown on more than 100 combat missions over. Before Jeff gets to talk, I have the pleasant duty of doing three things. Brief intro about SPIN Chennai to Jeff as well as to those who are new. Set the context for today's session. Why did we choose this topic and what are the real challenges? And the third, introduce Jeff, the speaker. About coming to the first one, which is about SPIN Chennai. SPIN Chennai is short of 25 years old as a knowledge ecosystem. SPIN Chennai affiliated to Carnegie Mellon's Software Engineering Institute as well as ISACA, the global body. Our vision is to build a world-class knowledge ecosystem which is very compelling, highly relevant and value-adding to the people and industry, distinctively futuristic and passionately creative. We have a 3,000 member knowledge ecosystem comprising of CXOs, senior leaders, SVPs, VPs, HR, marketing and sales professionals, quality and delivery professionals, BFSI, telecom, automotive, manufacturing industry folks, senior consultants, mentors, academia and other institutions. Some of the international gurus who have been associated with SPIN Chennai include Dr. Watts Humphrey, who was associated for nearly 10 years, in whose honor we have instituted the Watts Humphrey Award, which happens every year, with a huge participation from the industry to bring out the best case studies from the industry. We have had several international gurus associated with SPIN Chennai, including Louis Trigger from Israel, who is a theory of constraints expert. We had Dr. Bill Curtis from US, who has contributed to the development of CMMI and people CMO models. Mark Johnson, who is the management consultant and thought leader, co-founder of InnoSight, along with Clayton Christensen. He was there last month to share his thoughts with the SPIN community. So, apart from various other leading lights from India. Coming to today's session, Agile, most trending word in Google, right? If we talk about the most important trend, overwhelmingly the world is going Agile. The whopping 71% of organizations have adopted Agile methodologies, and about 90% of the Agile projects have faster time to market than the average for traditional project management. Speed to market, flexibility, cost control, risk management, quality, they're all hallmarks of Agile. In a VUCA world, organizations of all sizes must increase their speed, adaptability, and innovation to thrive in today's dynamic global environment. Agile is not just in the software process, it has moved to the boardroom. And today, every organization has started talking about business agility. The beauty of Agile Manifesto, written in 2001, for which Jeff is a signatory, is that despite changes the industry has seen, despite the passage of time, despite the fact that it has been applied to sectors and organizations far and beyond its original scope, the manifesto's flexibility and adaptive nature mean that it continues to be relevant even today. Agile is a mentality, a philosophy, and the manifesto sets out principles and values rather than prescribing certain processes. This means that plenty of developers work with the Agile mindset without even realizing it. The manifesto merely formalizes how many successful teams have always worked. The real problem with the manifesto today is not whether it is relevant, but how it is applied, or going through the motions of Agile without getting the benefits. without understanding the why of it. So, in order to be effective, underlying structures and cultures have to be supporting Agile. SPIN Chennai has been in the forefront of evangelizing Agile. Currently, our last physical session, the dual dialogues was on Agile. Jeff started his career as a fighter pilot, as I said earlier, where he achieved Top Gun status, more than 100 missions over North Vietnam. After 11 years as a pilot, he joined the faculty of the University of Colorado Medical School, where he received his doctoral degree. He co-founded the Center for Vitamins and Cancer Research under the sponsorship of Nobel laureate of a National Cancer Center Research grant that ran all IT programs and research for the Colorado Regional Cancer Center. In 1983, he joined a banking company that operated about 150 banks throughout North America, where he was the VP of Advanced Systems and General Manager of the ATM business unit. Noticing that waterfall processes at the bank were not working, he implemented the first prototype of for organizational transformation of a business unit. He has been VP of Engineering and CTO or CEO of 11 software companies. The first prototype Scrum, and in 1993, in the fifth company, created Scrum, as we now see it, used in 74% of Agile companies in over 100 countries. He was a signatory of the Agile Manifesto in 2001. Working as a senior advisor to Open New Venture Partners, Sutherland established his own company, Scrum Inc. Now recognized as the premier source of Scrum training in the world. His latest book, Scrum, Twice the Work, Half the Time, describes how he used his background and experience to create the most widely used Agile practice in the industry today. We are really fortunate to have him share his thoughts today with us. It is very, very rare for us in SPIN Chennai to get such a speaker of repute, and particularly the author of the model itself. So I have the pleasure and privilege of inviting Jeff Sutherland, the international guru, to share the tips to make Agile transformation successful.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to talk about Agile transformations. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
I'm here in Boston with I'm with Scrum Inc. and we we started originally in software, but now we move way beyond software. Yesterday, Northrop Grumman announced the launch of their latest rocket with Scrum. We work with rocket companies. We work with big oil companies, car companies, biotechs, and Scrum is, we've written the books on Scrum. I managed the Scrum Guide with Ken Schwaber. I wrote the Scrum at Scale Guide. Also recently released a book on Scrum patterns that has been being worked on for the last 10 years with Jim Copeland. We work very closely with our mentors, Ikujiro Nanaka and Hirotaka Takeuchi, who wrote the first paper describing Scrum project management. And so I want to talk to you today, though, about some of the challenges with Agile transformations. Recently, Forbes magazine published an article where they pointed out that 77% of Agile transformations are being implemented with Scrum. And when you look at where in the organization, you see that technology is only a piece of the Scrum. Implemented in operations, marketing, sales, business development. We are challenged to implement Scrum across the entire organization today. So we need a way of doing that that's more than software development, and a way that the salespeople can use just as well as the software developers. If you look at where these transformations have been successful, or this is leading versus lagging companies, the gray is leading. You'll see the biggest difference between the gray and the green is on the right, and the far right is implementing Agile across the entire enterprise. Or some organizations implement Agile in certain geographies across the enterprise. So the broader the implementation, the more effective companies are. people always ask me, where does Scrum work well? Well, there are only 3 companies in the world that have a market capitalization over $1 trillion. In August 2018, was the first company to achieve that valuation. Apple's very secretive about its development process, but I have Apple employees and former employees in my classes, and they tell me that Apple always meets its dates is that they implement Scrum by the book. And when I asked them what book, they said Scrum, the art of doing twice the work in half the time, the red book. A month later, Amazon market capitalization went over 1 trillion. And Amazon has 3,300 Scrum teams, and they're delivering more than once a second. And in April 2019, Microsoft went over 1 trillion. And Microsoft implements Scrum for all software tool development. Ken and I started working with them back in 2005. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. So if you have to compete with the leading companies in the world, they're doing Scrum really well. So you're going to have to be agile. It's not optional anymore. It used to be the banks thought, well, we're highly regulated, or insurance companies, we don't have to worry about this. But recently, I was training the strategy team for one of the biggest banks in Germany, and they said Amazon's doing loans in Germany. And they have more data on the customers than we do, and they can calculate the risk and give a loan in a few minutes, and it takes us weeks. So we have decided that we have to get out of the consumer loan business. They just woke up one morning and it was game over. I was training the senior management at Maersk, the largest shipping company in the world. And I asked them who their competition was. They said Amazon. I said, why is that? They said they're buying airplanes. They're leasing all the ships between the US and China. And the same is true in all industries. There's massive transformations going on. In automobiles, Tesla is now the #1 auto company in the world with a higher market cap than Toyota. The utility industry is being disrupted, and that's affecting the energy industry. So the speed of doing business is accelerating radically. The competition is getting stronger. And when COVID happened, as soon as COVID happened, I started getting email from some of the companies we work with, the biggest biotech firm in the United States. They sent me an email saying, Jeff, thank God we started implementing Scrum last fall, because as soon as we were shut down and had to work from home, it only took us a few days to be back up to normal operations. If we hadn't implemented Scrum, we would be spending 6 months trying to dig ourselves out of a hole because of COVID. So the more disruptive the environment, the more essential agility is. And with the speed of change, the MIT Sloan Review reported, the leading companies today are going to not be the same ones in 5 years. So most of the companies that are leaders today will be overtaken by more agile companies within 5 years. So it's really important for companies to get agile, but as the Forbes article noted, 47% of agile transformations fail. And the MIT Sloan Management Review did an analysis of the failures, and they found that 67% were terminal, meaning they went bankrupt or they were acquired. The company went out of existence. So this is pretty serious business today, and people need to do it to survive, and they need to do it well. So one of my total focus has been trying to show people how to do Scrum well and how to scale it well, so you get the kind of performance that Microsoft can get, or Amazon. And as I said, we started back with Microsoft in 2005. They were doing 18-month releases. It took 3 years of work to get thousands of people all releasing every fourth sprint. Their sprint was too long. They had this extra release process. But the interesting thing about Microsoft is they keep working on it. So by 2012, they were releasing every sprint. And this is all the Team Foundation systems, tools, 8 different product lines, all the software tools, all the build systems, test systems, project management systems. They're all designed today to work with Scrum. And they kept on tuning up this environment until 2017. They began releasing every day. Thousands of people doing a new release every day of all products. So that's the kind of competition people are facing. Now, back when we read Takeuchi Tanaka's paper, they were looking at lean hardware companies. And the highest performing teams they saw, they said, reminded them of the game of rugby and particularly the Scrum form rugby. So they said, we're going to call that Scrum project management. So when we adopted the name Scrum for what we were doing at the company I was working with at the time, we really took a look at the roots of lean and what Taiichi Ohno had done to create the Toyota production system. And we realized all of that directly applied to Scrum, but we had taken lean to the next level. And that inspired what today we've described in the Scrum Guide. We are doing an update to the Scrum Guide right now that will be out in a month or two. So we try to update it periodically. In 2001, Ken and I and Mike Beadle, another, the first person that implemented Scrum throughout his organization, joined the founders of Extreme Programming and 9 other consultants and authors of books at Snowbird, Utah, and we wrote the Agile Manifesto. At the time, only Scrum and Extreme Programming were widely deployed processes. So Scrum and XP are really the mother and the father of the Agile Manifesto. People have trouble implementing Agile, and so a couple of years ago, I wrote down, okay, how do you do this in a way that really works? And really works means you get twice the work in half the time. And you have to approach it with a really well implemented Scrum, as in the Scrum Guide. You have to, your Scrum needs to be lean. That means the process efficiency is over 25%. That means you need to measure the process efficiency of your teams. And in order to achieve high performance, there are certain patterns that we found have to be implemented, or you can't get the high performance as possible with Scrum. So to deliver on the promise, particularly at scale, you need the Scrum framework, you need the patterns, you need lean tools, but you also need a scaling framework that enables you to get twice the work in half the time at scale. And people were coming to me, particularly from the big computer chip companies, saying, we've implemented some of these scaling frameworks and they actually slowed us down. Jeff, you need to write down how you scale and not lose productivity. So under pressure to write down what we've been doing for the last 20 years, I went back to the roots of Scrum. At the time we were creating Scrum, I was chair of a group at the Object Management Group, and we were wrestling with the challenges that we, because the performance of hardware was exponentially increasing, but the improvement in productivity in software was very, very slow. And there was a gap, a big gap between hardware performance and software capabilities. And the question was how to remediate that. And we knew from, from Moore's law that in the chip business, they had systematically increased the number of transistors on a chip and decreased the cost of chips to where today they can put billions of transistors on a chip. And this is where the chip manufacturers were telling me, Jeff, you need to describe how do you do Scrum in the same way we add chips, transistors to a chip, and every component that you add cannot slow down the other components. So even back in 1993, we were thinking about this. We said, okay, if we implement Scrum as we've described it, we know we can get, at the time it was benchmarked 10 times faster. Maybe we could do 10 stories in a sprint and it'll only cost us $1,000 a story. If we implement the patterns that enable extreme performance, maybe we can do 100 stories in a sprint and the story only costs us $250. And if we completely automate testing and deployment, which is today called DevOps, maybe we can do 1,000 stories in a sprint and a story costs us half as much. So that kind of thinking, how do we drive systematically software development in that area? And what you saw in the Microsoft slide, they systematically implemented that many years to get faster, release more and more often. The fundamental problem with scaling is Brook's law. Okay, so in the 1960s, Fred Brooks led the IBM 360 operating system project. And he wrote a book called The Mythical Man Month on the challenges. And in the book, he articulated what is known as Brook's law. Adding people to a late project makes it later. And the reason for that is that as you add more people to a project, the communication overhead explodes. And we have extensive data in one study of 491 projects. They show that if a 6-person team takes 11 months to finish a project, for the same project, a 10-person team takes 17 months. So you can never have a 10-person team, or it will delay significantly even a single project. And if you scale to many, many teams, that delay gets magnified. So the challenge is to figure out how to avoid Brook's law with small teams. The first published project ever showing that it's possible to overcome Brook's law was in 2007 at the big IEEE Hawaii conference. And it was a paper on teams from the United States, Canada, and Russia all working together. And when they doubled the number of teams by doubling the number of teams, by adding more teams in Russia, the productivity of the whole project more than doubled. And when the peer reviewers of the conference looked at the paper, they said, Jeff, you're writing this as a way to improve productivity, but this paper shows something that has never been shown before. The real finding in this paper is that you can actually break Brook's law. Okay, so we need a scaling framework that can break Brook's law. So how do we get that? It needs to be designed as a network of nodes that's fractal in nature. Small teams, and set up so using object-oriented principles so that you get information hiding to overcome Brook's loss problem. These kind of architectures are actually seen everywhere in nature. Also, they're seen in social networks today. In the internet world, they're also seen in chip design. And this is why the chip manufacturer said to me, you need to write down how to do Scrum like we do chip design. It needs to scale linearly. We don't want to lose productivity per team as we add more teams. Well, it was interesting because I'd spent a decade working with a global group of experts on Scrum, writing down patterns on the way Scrum works, solutions to problems encountered when implementing Scrum. I was working particularly on patterns that enabled hyper-productive Scrum, really fast Scrum. But repeatedly during the 10 years, Jim Copley, who was the product owner of the effort, said, we're not going to have any scaling patterns. There aren't any scaling patterns. They're all specific to a particular situation, and they almost always slow you down. So we're not going to have any. So I did 10 years of thinking, how do we scale without scaling patterns? Well, one of the things that we found out is that if a team gets too big, it grows to the point of inefficiency, about 7 people, then you're going to have to split the team. So we had to have a pattern called mitosis, which is the way a cell splits. And as soon as we split the teams, then we had to figure out, well, how do we coordinate across teams if they're both delivering the same product? And so we had a pattern called Scrum of Scrums, which is a set of teams sprinting together. And we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other patterns that enabled the Scrum of Scrums to work at scale, getting the sprints synchronized, getting a common definition of done, having a common sprint planning, sprint review, holding a common backlog refinement, knowledge sharing groups to a feather, establish a regular event daily, the scale daily Scrum. The implementation of that was actually referenced in the pattern was from IDX, which is now GE Healthcare. I was CTO there for many years. Ken Schwaber was a consultant there, worked with me the entire time. And because we had many hundreds of teams, this was the first really large implementation of Scrum at scale. And the way we define the Scrum of Scrums is that it was a delivery team. The goal of the Scrum of Scrums at the end of every sprint was to have a perpetually shippable product. And if the product owner said that's enough, it was shipped. And one of the challenges, one of the reasons that Agile transformations fail is they don't have a Scrum of Scrums that's a delivery team. And really makes them slow and unable to. We established a regular Scrum of Scrums event, a scale of daily Scrum. We established a common definition of Scrum. This is all documented. Now, once we had multiple teams, we needed to say, well, how do we handle the product owner function in Scrum? We're going to have more product owners. We have more teams. So we created a pattern called the product owner team. And, product owners and the product owner team, the model of that really comes from Lean. It's a chief engineering model at Toyota. So the chief product owner is the chief engineer, and he owns the product. He's the, as they say at Toyota, he's the president of the product. And the job of the president of Toyota is to support the product owner, the chief engineer. So the product owners drive the business. Now, once we had multiple teams and chief product owners, realized from long experience that management structures tend to disrupt the product owner's backlog, and many different agendas among the management teams in large companies, and they will cripple the performance of the organization unless the product owners can get them aligned with the backlog and get them supporting the backlog. And so to do that, we had a pattern for a meeting called a meta scrum, where on a regular cadence, at least the product owners get together with the management at that level. They get alignment and agreement that everyone's going to support one backlog. Those are all the patterns we need, because the only other thing we really need is a leadership team that's agile. So we have companies today, large ones, that are totally Scrum, with the senior management running as a Scrum team. So however large your agile implementation is within an organization, that implementation needs to be led by a leadership team that has executive authority, that is running like a Scrum team. And their backlog is the operational development of the organization. And it has a product owner, a Scrum Master, and the pattern for that is a Scrum team. There's nothing new for that leadership team. They run as a Scrum. So we see in some companies that leadership team, I've seen some of them, they meet in a public space with their backlog on a wall. Anybody walking through the company can listen in on what the executives are doing, and they can see the progress on the wall. So it makes it highly visible that everybody in the company is doing Scrum, and that things at the executive level are getting done that are actually supporting the teams that are doing Scrum. So this set of patterns I call a minimum viable bureaucracy. Mitosis, splitting teams, the Scrum team itself, the Scrum of Scrums, a set of teams, the product owner team that is responsible for a Scrum of Scrums, a Scrum meeting with the management, and the Scrum team at the top of the organization, the executive team running as a Scrum, leading the Agile effort. Now, people are constantly asking me, well, what if our management is really not Agile? Well, if you read Professor Kotter's book, Professor Kotter is the leading change expert at Harvard, has been for decades. He's written dozens of books. In his book, Accelerate, he talks about scaling Agile. And in the book, he says, when you implement Agile with an organization, it's a separate operating system. And you need to create this bubble in the organization that's Agile, and it needs to be led by an Agile team. If the waterfall management leads the Agile bubble, it will fail 100% of the time. So that's something everybody needs to think about, because there's a lot of waterfall management with Agile in the companies. Now, why is it that that minimum viable bureaucracy drives project success? Last summer, Jim Johnson, the CEO of the Standish Group, said, Jeff, I want you let's have coffee. I want to show you my latest chaos report. They publish a report every year on the state of the industry. That report has over 500,000 projects in it, extensive data. And he said, I've been trying for the last 3 years to figure out why Scrum works. And in my database, the thing that enables success by the biggest margin is actually time to make a decision. He said, if you separate projects by decision time, if decision latency is an hour or less, the success rate is 58%. If the decision latency is 5 hours or more, the success rate drops to 18%. And that is a big difference than the difference between waterfall and agile. So he says, what I think is that Scrum is enabling faster decision time. It pushes a lot of decisions down to the team. They can decide in a few minutes. Priority decisions are made by the product owner. If the product owner is closely working with the team, they can turn around a decision within the hour. And if the leadership team is meeting every day, having a Scrum meeting every day, they can address major issues in a few hours. And you can get the average time for decisions in the organization down less than an hour. That's the key to project success. So as I said, a large chip manufacturer, this particular one, there's data on just one division has 500 teams. And it took them 12 years, but they were able to get that whole division with 500 teams running 18 times faster. When they introduced one of the IT scaling frameworks in the division, it slowed them down. And the senior management said, we're not going to have any scaling frameworks here. And we don't even like the word Scrum. We don't want you using the word Scrum, but you need to go twice as fast. Instead of 18 times, we want 36. Figure it out. And they came to me and they said, Jeff, what should we do? The only way we're going to do this is actually do Scrum better. And I said, well, you probably need to change the word, but yes, you're going to have to do Scrum better. You're going to have to do what I call Scrum at scale. And they said, you need to write that down, how to do it. So I did. So let's take an example, very interesting example. One of the frameworks that caused the chip manufacturer a big headache was the scaled agile framework. But Quicken Loans, which is the biggest mortgage loan operation in the United States, probably the biggest one in the world, implemented the scaled agile framework with 26 release trains for 1,700 people. And this is the most successful safe implementation I've seen. They cut cycle time from 86 to 42 days. So they basically doubled production. I've never seen that before. Usually it's around maybe 20%. But the leader of the brand marketing release train, which is the whole front end of the loan system, decided to work with me and become a Scrum at Scale trainer. And he went back and he didn't throw out SAFe, but he implemented Scrum at Scale patterns in his teams. And they were able to accelerate that, they take that doubling and make the doubling go 3.4 times faster. So they get almost twice the work in half the time, even from the most highly optimized scaled agile framework. So now they're going 6.8 times faster than they were when they're doing waterfall. So the minimum viable bureaucracy is the key. Scrum at Scale. It radically reduces agile transformation failure. Because if you can deliver twice the work in half the time at scale, you will win. Okay. And everybody will have to get aligned to make that happen. So I think it's a secret to the future survival of your company and most companies in the world. Um, so that's what I want to talk about today. And there might be questions about this, and I could maybe in a discussion go deeper and how we implement this and how it all works.
Yeah, we have had some questions coming, Jeff. So should we go to questions now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Satish Kumar Ramamurthy has asked a question. Request for a brief suggestion on the starting point for implementing the Scrum in an organization typically working in waterfall model. He's asking what is the starting point for implementing Scrum? A brief suggestion.
What really works, some scaling frameworks say, let's take all 300 teams and have them do Scrum all at once. I have not found that to be very successful. So with Scrum at scale, we come in, we want to meet with the leadership first. We want to ask them, okay, where do you want to implement agility? Initially, we want a small set of teams. So we need to decide what initiatives or projects they will work on. We want to coach them to boot this up well, such that they're getting very good performance. And to do that, we're going to have to resolve impediments within the organization that prevent performance. So until we can get a set of teams working really well, maybe 6 to 9 teams, we do not want to roll this out to the rest of the company. So let's get the 6 to 9 teams working well. So to do that, what would be, let's prioritize your initiatives, products, projects, whatever you're doing. Let's take one of those top initiatives. Let's boot up a set of teams. Let's get that working really well. Now we need to set up the leadership for the small set of teams right. So we need an executive meta Scrum team that's going to own the prioritization. We need an executive action team, the leadership that's going to run as a Scrum, that's going to manage that organization. And we get that working. And we can usually do that within 6 weeks. We have a working model. Once we have that, we can then, in rolling waves, at 3M, in one of the biggest divisions, 3M, we rolled out 6 to 9 teams every 6 weeks for 6 years. But every step of the way, they were measuring production. And they didn't get quite 400%, but they got 300% every step of the way. No matter how many teams they added, production went up 300%. So that's the way you want to do it. Systematically, a good reference model, the right leadership teams. Then you are guaranteed to be successful.
Okay, good. The next question is from Koel. He's asking how to transform teams which use SAP platforms into Agile. Many of them are not able to bring value at the end of 2 to 4 week sprints. And they end up doing a mini waterfall cycle. Kind of the SAP platforms, are they amenable to?
Right. So actually, I just met with SAP senior management yesterday, and I pointed out that the biggest challenge they have, they're doing Scrum internally, but when they deploy, they have these waterfall deployments that cost huge amounts of money and very, very late. So, and I told them about the implementation we just did at Schlumberger, a big oil company. They had spent $1 billion, 10 years trying to implement SAP with no results. It looked like it was going to be another $1 billion in another 10 years. And the CIO called me up and he said, Jeff, we spent $100 million with the leading consultants in the world to try to get Agile. And what they did was they hired 600 more people and added them to our current 600. So now we have 1,200 people and they got 0% improvement in production. So the production per person was cut in half by adding these people. So he called me up. He said, I read your book. He said, Jeff, I'm desperate. What should we do? So we went in there. We said, okay. And we actually we worked with SAP experts. And we brought some of them in. We also brought our own teams in. And basically the message to them was, okay, get a stable, standard SAP implementation. And then we're going to Scrum enhancing that. And SAP has function points, SAP function points that you can measure as you're adding functionality. And the CIO said, okay, if we're going to do twice the work in half the time, well, we're not getting any extra performance with these extra 600 people. Let's cut them back. They're mostly contractors. They cut the staff by 40%. Within a few months, they had saved $30 million. Within about 8 months, they were going, by SAP function point measure, they were going 11 times faster. And they deployed SAP. So they collapsed that 10 years into about 1 year for the deployment by going 11 times faster. So, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Scrum can make you go 10 times faster if you do it right, particularly on big projects and particularly with SAP.
Does it require something specific for SAP, or the traditional implementation is fine for SAP as well?
No, I'm talking the traditional implementation of SAP is a waterfall.
Okay. No, what I mean is the Scrum implementation, which we adopt as a standard. Do we need to tweak that for anything for SAP or do specially?
Well, there's no tweaking of the Scrum framework, but you have to figure out how to get the SAP enhancements working in sprints so that you can actually deliver stuff that works every sprint.
Okay.
And the question is, that's a problem, but that's a problem because they're not doing Scrum properly.
Okay. Good. The next question is from Ramanathan. He's asking, the work from home culture, does there any fine tuning of the agile processes? Because one of the factors of agile, or at least which enables, is co-location and more frequent interactions. And
well, the research clearly shows that co-location really increases production. But here we are in the COVID world, and nobody's co-located. In my company, we get the same production whether we're co-located or not, and that is because the Scrum is implemented properly. The problem with not being co-located is any problem you have in your Scrum implementation is going to be magnified when you distribute. So you have to be very disciplined in your Scrum implementation to distribute it. But the good news about it, we have published a half a dozen papers. If you go to scrumming.com website, search for Scrum papers, you'll see at least half a dozen papers. They come from the IEEE Digital Library. You can get them free on my site on distributed Scrum, how to get twice the work in half the time when you have teams in India, teams in the United States, teams in Europe. So we showed how to do that. We published a lot of papers on that.
yeah. So what you are essentially saying is there has not been any impact to productivity due to work from home, or
if you do it right, what happened, so for example, we had one of our first papers had a Dutch company who had an Indian subsidiary, and they brought the people together in Amsterdam and got a very high speed Scrum with extreme programming inside. Then they moved half of the team back to India.
Mm-hmm.
When the half moved back to India, the productivity started to decrease. They immediately intervened and they found that the senior Indian developer was assigning tasks to the junior developers. So he was breaking the Scrum model.
Okay.
So, okay, we're going to make the senior Indian developer the Scrum master, and they trained and coached him as a Scrum master you need to create a self-organizing team, not be telling everybody what to do all the time. And the productivity immediately went back up to when they were working together in Amsterdam.
Okay.
So the productivity will not decrease if you carefully watch it. And if it does, you have to fix the Scrum, okay?
Okay.
We have so much bad Scrum out there.
Mm.
Bad Scrum does not scale. And about half of the Scrum out there, we have extensive. Doesn't work very well.
The next question comes from Mati Raja. He's asking, for waterfall, we had only one PMP. For Agile, we have safe, Scrum at scale, disciplined Agile. Why do we have too many conflicts?
Well, everybody wants to make their own framework and make a lot of money, and SAFE is, SAFE was implemented by Dean Leffingwell, and he was the guy that sold RUP for Ivar Jakobsen. So a couple of years ago, Ivar came to me and he said, Jeff, he said, my company's the leading SAFE provider in Europe, but you remember what happened to RUP? And I said, well, it got bigger and bigger and it got so heavyweight, it just fell over. And he said, yeah. So he says, if that happens, I don't want to be totally dependent on SAFE. So why don't we work together on Scrum at scale? Besides, he says, for all my SAFE implementations, it really only works in IT. And I want to run management Scrums. I want to run Scrum in sales, in marketing. And that's not a useful model. If you take the SAFE diagram and you give it to a sales team, they're going to throw you out of the room. Okay, so he says, I need a model that actually works throughout the whole organization. So now he has some really big implementations of Scrum at scale in countries and in really big companies, where the IT guys are actually even doing multiple frameworks. Some of them are doing SAFE, some of them are doing less, some of them may be doing Discipline Agile. It doesn't matter. They're all, Scrum at scale is a meta framework, and these IT frameworks are really instantiations of the meta framework by doing certain things in certain ways. So the reason we have a lot of them is everybody's trying to make money. The reason why I created Scrum at scale is so they could all work together, right? We could actually get something that works. That was my incentive. Get it to actually work.
So the next one is from Karthikeyan. He's asking, will Agile disrupt AI? How to successfully implement that in the use case?
Well, one of the leading AI companies in the world, the head of the AI system, he says, hey, we just put Scrum into the AI. He said, the way you trained us to prioritize in product owner training, he said, it's just perfect. We put it into the AI and it just does it automatically. We got Scrum running on autopilot. And about 5 years ago, I was in Zurich, and a guy from the IBM research lab came to me. He said, Jeff, we're gonna make chips that run Scrum. I said, how do you know that will work? He said, if it works with people, it will work on the computer. I said, you're gonna need a different type of chip, right? It's gonna have to be adaptive in real time. And he said, yeah, that's what we're working on. An adaptive chip that can do Scrum. So, an AI Scrum is going to cause an even bigger disruption.
So it will be to the bots playing the role of Scrum Master and.
Yeah. Because Scrum is, I mean, it's all based on scientific research. It's totally laid out. You have a backlog. There's systematic ways to prioritize it. The backlog flows into a cross-functional team. So if you have a set of chips in the machine that have capacity, that's going to flow to where the work can be done. And as soon as anybody's done, they're coordinating with other people, right? Making sure the whole thing works. All of that can be done logically.
In the case AI is involved, will technical debt at all, or will the technical debt getting into backlog and all those things, will that happen, or it will be a straight?
Yeah, I mean, so we train the product owners. You're going to have to look at. You need to know where defects are coming in, what components they're existing in. You need to do a rational prioritization, a business case for where you do remediation of technical debt. Again, that's a logical process that can be automated. And frankly, I think a good AI is going to be much better than people at it. It's going to be much more.
Do you know of companies working on AI with Scrum?
As I said, I think they're the biggest AI company I don't want to say who they are.
Okay.
I think the biggest AI company in the world is using Scrum for their development, and they're actually putting some of the aspects of Scrum into the AI itself.
Yeah, the next question is on the software services industry. This man, sorry, one moment. Yeah, it is Karthik. He's asking, in software service industry where projects and leaders of client organizations provide leadership, how can leaders of service companies be part of Metascrum or provide active involvement with the decision-making processes?
Well, the best I've seen done with outsourcing in Scrum, there was a company in Florida that was doing software for preloaded Visa and MasterCard. So, and they were so good at it that the big banks were all outsourcing it to them. And they would go in with an agile proposal. They would say to Bank of America, okay, you need this new product. This is going to take 5 sprints, and it's $20,000 a sprint for 30 sprints. And so they had the agile plan all laid out. And then when it was funded, the Bank of America quickly found out they were so fast, so cheap, with such high quality that they started saying, well, we need another 9 teams for 9 sprints. And they said, what's that for? He says, we're going to start outsourcing our other development to you because we can get stuff that's a lot faster, a lot cheaper, with a lot higher quality from this agile contracting model. So you have to work with the vendors. We've done even that. We're working on $1 billion ship right now for the Navy, with one of the biggest defense contractors. They came to me, they said, to compete today, we're going to have to come in at half price on that $1 billion ship. You need to show us how to do that with Scrum. Well, they had to work with the customer, the Navy in this case, get agile practices agreed to. One of the most important things is in the military, they do earned value burn up. And until they could get the military to agree earned value burn up in points, they would not do the project. So they have to get certain agreements with the customer in order to execute well in an agile world. Now, let's take that a step further. In the commercial setting, the biggest website in Amazon, I think, is bull.com. They're the Amazon of the Netherlands. And they were being, their whole infrastructure was being managed by an external company. And I was working with the external company. They were doing Scrum and operations, basically operations support. And they proposed that we have a workshop one day with the leadership of Bull.com, the lead product owners, lean agile people, meet with the operations Scrum, and we decide how to integrate the Scrum teams.
Mm-hmm.
So that the operations Scrum team would be meeting with the Scale Daily Scrum every day with the website people. And in one day, we eliminated a contract management team at Bull.com and a second contract management team at the operations company. We eliminated 2 teams, and the whole thing worked much better. That became a totally integrated Scrum. So the way Scrum works is you can integrate companies as well as integrate teams within your organization.
Yeah, but if you eliminated the contract management on both sides, how will that function be implemented, or
Well, I actually have I'm not sure I can find how quickly I can find it, but I actually have an example of this for a hardware company that I was talking about yesterday. And if I can put my finger on that example, I want to show you how it works. This is a hardware company in Italy, and they build smart system houses. And let's see, do I have it? Am I going to be able to do it? It's hard for me to quickly get that slide, but basically they had multiple teams internal to the company. They had other teams remote that were part of the company. They had multiple external vendors. So they had product owners within the companies that were product owners with the vendors. Some of the vendors supplied hardware components for specific teams. So that team would have a product owner for the vendor on that team. So, and some of the vendors were more global, so the chief product owner was a product owner of the vendor. But the Scrum teams themselves were all integrated into a Scrum of Scrums model. So integrating these teams is actually becoming quite common.
So, Jeff, because you were there, you were able to get that kind of perspective and eliminate those 2 teams and bring about. So, in case you are not available, what kind of capabilities would one require?
Well, what we do, we work with a lot of companies, and we have experts in my company where we'll send in like only 2 or 3 coaches. And our goal is to boot up the first teams and start training the Agile practice within the organization. So they're not outsourcing a project to us, they're outsourcing the training they need to build their own Agile system within the organization. So with very low cost, they can get.
Okay. Yeah. Shall we move on to the next one, or you're looking for the video or the presentation? Jeff?
Yeah. Still trying to find that slide.
Okay, sure.
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to. Oh, here it is. Okay. So this is. This is a company called VMAR. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Whoops.
Automation and IoT.
Okay. So is that showing all right? Whole team alignment?
Yep.
So they booted up Scrum. They have scale daily Scrum meetings. They have a Scrum of Scrums. A senior manager was serving as a Scrum of Scrums master. And here's the structure I was talking about. On the left, you have the Scrum of Scrums. They had 3 teams internally co-located, a 4th team remote, and then they had supplier A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm.
And how the product owner structure is set up. Supplier C, the chief product owner, is maybe do that. But supplier B, team 1 has a product owner for that. Similarly for supplier A. And then you can see in the Metascrum side, you can see the product owner picture, how the product owners look. Which product owners are working with which team. And really nice thing about this implementation, well, they developed this buffet planning style where teams would pull stories, they'd create a buffet table of stories, and they would come through just like a meal, and teams would pull stories. Very creative way of working. This is their demo rooms and such. But here's the data, okay? Typically when you start with hardware, it's hard to get something visible for a couple of sprints. And by sprint 3, 4, they're starting to see results. And then the velocity starts escalating.
Oh,
So,
it seems to be exponential.
yeah, that's what you want to see, right?
Yeah. This is really unbelievable. Fantastic story. Yeah. Coming back to the questions, Rakesh Singh is asking, in Scrum at scale, how portfolio management is integrated?
Okay, so the way we think about portfolio management in Scrum at scale, first of all, Scrum at scale has components that, if I can see the Scrum at scale slide. Just one here, okay. That would not work properly. Share this again. Scrum at scale itself, you can see in the picture on the right, it has interlocking circles. The right-hand side is the product owner cycle. The left-hand side is what we call the Scrum Master cycle. The product owner cycle starts with a strategic vision. That's going to lead to multiple initiatives which need to be prioritized. And in backlog prioritization, that's what that is. It's portfolio management. And the way we like to do it at Scrum Inc. is to basically, we want to know what's the net present value per point of every initiative. We're going to prioritize them by net present value per point, and then we're going to implement them in that order. And in fact, that's what the AI is doing that we were talking about. Doing portfolio management. And that is the next level backlog decomposition for any specific large piece. How do you break that down into smaller pieces so they can flow
Mm-hmm. Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, Anand Venkatraman from Infosys is asking, is integrated DevOps teams a must for scaling? What level of DevOps maturity is a prerequisite?
Well, the reason that you want to do DevOps is that get a huge return on investment. I had a slide from a paper by David Rico that shows that as you start to, probably take me too much time to find that paper, but it does return on investment of systematically going from manual testing all the way to completely automated. And every step of the way, the return on investment increases until at the end, there's a 72,900% return on investment. For every dollar you spend, you get $72,900 back. Getting there. So it's not mandatory for scaling, but you get huge benefits. And so if you look at Amazon, where does most of Amazon's profit come from? AWS.
Okay.
Doesn't come from selling, books. Well, about half or maybe a little more of the profit comes from AWS. And that's because they've completely automated the whole system, and that now everybody in the world pays them to do it for them. So their return on investment is probably even bigger than 72,000%. So as you start, one of the prime directives of anybody driving an implementation today would be to systematically move towards a more automated testing and deployment. As you saw in the Microsoft example, that started in 2005, it wasn't until 2017 that they got there. Once they got there, then it was only until 2020 that they became the most valuable company in the world, right? So there's a really big payoff for driving down that track.
Did Microsoft adopt Scrum recently, or they have been using it for?
They came to me in 2005 and they said, "Hey, we have our own Agile practice, the Microsoft Agile framework, but they said we only have 4% market share. And we can't function with 4% market share, and almost 80% of the people are using Scrum. So they said, we're going to adopt Scrum as not only our process, but the model for all the tools." And then they had both Ed and I working with them to implement that.
Okay.
And they were particularly forceful on pushing Ken and I to write down the Scrum guide. They said, for Microsoft to base all their tooling on Scrum, selling tooling into the market, you need Scrum standardized in a way that it's
even in Microsoft, if you see, bulk of their revenue and profits come only from the cloud division.
Yes, right. The cloud is where.
So that is where the highest automation happens.
Yeah.
Yep. Good. The next question is from Anish. He's asking, how can Scrum be implemented in a better way in distributed setup, whether it's on-site or offshore? The challenge we have is most of the ceremonies are attended by on-site team, the US or whatever, and only status call is attended by the offshore team. Many people call this as agile, or somewhere it is like mini waterfall. Most of the service-based companies in India follow this model. How can we change this? Any thoughts?
If you read the paper that I mentioned in 2007, in the U.S., in Utah, most of them in Utah, and in Russia and St. Petersburg. And in that particular case, the teams were specifically set up so that they were half Russian and half American. And they had a daily meeting every day. So it was early morning in the United States, it was late afternoon in Russia. So, and they demonstrated that they actually got better performance with the Russians, Americans by themselves, because the Russians were doing better Scrum, but they were not doing it separately. They were on the team. So by having the Russians on the team, actually made all the teams better.
Yeah. Snehal Tulsiram has come out with a remark. It says, agile teams help the organizations and the management save money, but it puts more on the developers. Because earlier we had big teams. Now agile team sizes are restricted to 7 to 9. But management expects the same kind of work or a little bit more.
Well, the whole point of creating Scrum was to make lives better for all, and to immediately move to a sustainable pace a week, no nights, no weekends, and then establish a practice that could get much more done, small amount of work time, by changing the workflow so that it became easier to get things done. So what you do when you're setting up these scrums, you want to initially eliminate all overtime. They only work a normal work week. And then you want to systematically implement the workflow so that they get a lot more value delivery. We have many studies that show, I remember one really interesting gaming company had a date they need to meet before Christmas, and investments depended on it. So they started working overtime. Everybody was going to work 12 hours a day. At the end of the very first sprint, they found that they had 30% more defects, and the time to fix the defect was more than the time that they worked overtime. So they got slower by working overtime. So this is what the management does not understand. They want more stuff. You need to get a good, stable work environment, normal pace, and then they need to change the workflow to a Scrum workflow that delivers a lot more value.
Yeah, Manoj is come out with a remark again. He says earlier knowledge management was much better because of the FSD, PRD, the SRS, and such documents. But now we are saying the Agile Manifesto, that is one of the four Agile Manifesto statements are adhered to, and the knowledge is there in the code itself, is what we are saying now with the Scrum and Agile. So is it a sustainable argument, and are we losing out on knowledge?
Well, the challenge that we face, so for example, I ran the first FDA compliant project to get approved as a medical device. And when we had run previous projects, because of the documentation required, it took at least twice as long. And what I did was I put the FDA expert with the product owner, and I said, I want you to put the FDA requirements as part of the product backlog, part of the definition of done. And I want the teams to figure out how to get it done quickly. What they did was make every story in every sprint had to be compliant with FDA. So at the end of every sprint, they had a shippable increment that was totally compliant, which meant mainly traceability back to design. And in 6 months, they actually had it done, got FDA approval, and deployed it. And I kept careful metrics, and we used 95% less documentation.
See, for somebody new who is coming into the project or system, to quickly understand, some of the aspects, which is available is code. Earlier, there used to be documentation.
Yeah, so we've used much more multimedia documentation. So for example, one of my previous companies where I was CTO for many years was a company building healthcare systems for physicians and hospitals. And we had a lot of really experienced architects, MIT, PhD kind of guys. And they said, we used to write all these architecture documents, but they were always out of date. We need to find a better way. So what happened is a Scrum Master actually came up with the idea, let's have a meeting every week, and the senior architect will present a component of the system, will go through its object design, will describe how it evolved to where it is today, and what the projection is for the future in the next year, and then the entire development organization can answer questions. We'll capture that all in video, and then it will be available to new people coming in. And by the time we got 100 videos on the architecture of the system, people said that was the best architectural documentation they'd ever seen.
Okay.
So moving towards more multimedia documentation, there is lots of opportunity to put more documentation in the code, but being clear about the design, understanding the object framework that the design is, that you're implementing, so that maybe that is in some tooling. There are better tools today than the old paper documentation.
Okay. Yeah, Raja is asking, what are the 3 symptoms where Agile or scaled Agile is failing? Which is the engineering practices you suggest to follow in Agile?
Okay, so major cause of failure is that the Scrum is not working well, right? So if you take one team that's not working well, and then you generate 100 teams not working, it's a lot worse than one team not working well, right? 1,000 times worse. So if you look at the data on teams in the Standish Group for 500,000 projects, split into waterfall versus agile, you find that the good news is that the agile success rate is twice as high, but 50% of the agile teams are late, over budget, can't deliver at the end of the sprint. They're agile in name only. So people create agile transformations out of those 50% of the teams that can't deliver, and the inability to deliver is magnified at scale. And then the agile transformation fails. Now, that would be the top reason. Number 2 reason is that the agile transformation has waterfall leadership. And we wrote a paper in the Harvard Business Review called Embracing Agile. And that paper was about the 7 things that managers do that block agility, and they don't even know they're doing it. They have an old mindset that causes agile teams to fail. And so I would say that's the second most common cause of failure. And the third is if you don't implement, like probably the biggest market share right now is SAFe. If you just implement SAFe blindly and try to put everything in SAFe in practice, you're not going to get a very good result. You have to be very selective and very careful. It's like, remember in the RUP days, if any of you ever implemented the Rational Unified Process, it had 1,000 great engineering practices. If you tried to implement all 1,000 of them, it was so heavyweight, you couldn't deliver anything. So you had to be extremely selective of what was the right thing in your environment to implement to get something that actually would work. And the same thing is true with these scaling frameworks.
Good. So we have another 3 more minutes to the 1.5 hour time window, but we still have some more questions. Suggest we take one more question and then answer them later, or you want us to continue? And
okay, why don't we take one more question, then send me the questions and I'll see if I can respond later.
Okay. The last question then. Ruben is asking, how can we mitigate the risk when product owner adds new requirements directly in sprint backlog based on their end business requirement during the course of the sprint, which deviates the delivery against plan often? Any suggestions, please?
Yes. This, in Scrum, you're not allowed to do that. or I should say the product owner does have authority to do virtually anything, but if you change the sprint backlog during the sprint, that will cause significant reduction in performance. So the way we manage that in the training today, training in Scrum is not enough. You need to know the patterns of performance. And one of them is you need to have a buffer for things that would interrupt the sprint. And it needs to be it needs to be data-driven based on historical data. And the way that pattern works is if product owner wants to put something into the sprint, it needs to go into the buffer. And if the buffer overflows, the product owner has to stop the sprint and replan completely. And we find if you implement that practice, most of the time people don't want to stop the sprint and replan. So the product owner will be very careful what he injects into that buffer. And usually the buffer won't fill up. It'll give the team some extra time. And if the buffer never fills up, then the historical data on buffer size goes down. So we manage that practice. We have a pattern that really manages that well. But in general, the management and the product owners need to understand if you change sprint backlog, you can change product backlog every day, all the time. That's not a problem. But once it goes into a sprint, if you change that, you're going to cut production, often by a lot, 50%, 80%. And a good product owner is going to point out to any manager that I can do that, but that we're going to cut production by over 50%. You really want to do that? That's going to cost you, maybe it costs you a few $1 million. You want to do that.
There's a trade-off.
Rajaram?
Yeah.
Rajaram, before we close, some requests from our members. They all want to switch on the camera and take a screenshot so that we can have a picture with Jeff. And also it will be useful for us for SPIN. We can even put that in the gallery mode and we can take all the screens so that it will be useful for us also. So let's take a couple of minutes and I would request all of us to switch on your camera. And please take the snap selfie, so-called selfie, on your computer. And meanwhile, we will also take some screenshots of all of you who have attended so far. Just 1 minute, switch on your cameras. And it's nice to see people also instead of just speaking to a screen. Whoever wants to see your face, please switch on the camera. I'm also taking some snaps.
Yeah, at the peak, we touched 100.
Yes.
Enable, please.
Yes, you can enable the camera, please.
Can we have Jeff also on the screen?
Yeah, he's there.
He's already there, but I don't know how to move yourself closer to Jeff.
Yeah, before I hand it over to Raghav to do the vote of thanks, I would like to say, we are working on bringing such global experts. We have Jeffrey Moore. We are talking to the Silicon Valley technology guru, Jeffrey Moore, and Rita McGrath of Columbia Business School. She has authored so many books on in HBR. Chris Howard, Chief of Research at Gartner. So we will keep you posted, right? And before I hand it over to Raghav, I would like to thank especially Jeff for accepting and delivering a very, very insightful, right from the horse's mouth. We are really pleased. Thank you very much, Jeff. Over to you, Raghav, for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Jeff, for making it today. And people on call, within 9 minutes after our mail to Jeff, he responded saying yes. Yes, I will do a session with SPIN Chennai. Within 9 minutes. We never thought, or we never had such a response, such a speedier response from any of the other authorities who have spoken here. I think it is really amazing. Thanks, Jeff, for joining all the way from Colombia. Today, people have not only joined from Chennai, but people have joined from Canada, France, Singapore also.
Also Malaysia.
Okay.
I saw somebody from Malaysia.
Malaysia.
Great. Okay,
Paris.
and also from Malaysia.
Paris.
And thank you so much, Jeff, for making it today and delivering an insightful note on Agile Scrum and re-emphasizing your survival depends on agility and being agile. And thank you so much once again. And
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, give him a big hand.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you.